Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the edge of an ancient desert. You're standing on a coastline where the sand stretches into infinity, and the Mediterranean glimmers like a mirage under the sun. There's a hot breeze, some very unimpressed gulls circling overhead, and a whole lot of nothing. No buildings, no roads, just a few worn paths and a scrappy fishing village that smells vaguely of brine and old goat. Now imagine a young man, 25, give or take, standing here in a fancy cloak, pointing dramatically at the horizon and saying, "Right here, this is where I'll build the greatest city on Earth." That man is Alexander the Great, and yes, he's dead serious. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, drop your location and local time in the comments. Always fun to see who's drifting off where. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the dust alongside Alexander's entourage, which includes advisors, engineers, and at least one guy who's still trying to remember how aqueducts work. They've just taken Egypt with hardly a fight, because, honestly, the Persians guarding it were tired and underpaid, and now Alexander is free to do something dramatic. Like declare, "We shall build a city here," even though the place has no clean water, and the only thing growing is skepticism. What made him choose this spot? Well, that's the mystery. To your left, the Mediterranean, deep, moody, with hidden storms and the promise of trade. To your right, the Nile Delta, a tangled fan of marshes and crocodiles. Directly ahead, empty sand. Alexander's eyes gleam with ambition, or possibly dehydration. He claims a dream told him to do it. Historians still argue whether that dream was divine inspiration or the result of a suspicious fig. There's a tiny village here already, Rakotis, mostly mud huts and suspicious cats. The locals eye Alexander's army like, "Oh no, more gods with swords." But instead of looting the place, Alexander announces he's here to build. Not just any city, mind you, but a living monument to Greek culture, commerce, and of course, himself. You walk with him as he paces out imaginary streets in the sand, muttering about harbor access, wind directions, and temple placements. He seems to have this entire city mapped in his head, right down to the library that doesn't exist yet. He's obsessed with grids, symmetry, and straight lines. None of the usual messy chaos of Middle Eastern cities. Nope, this will be a Greek ideal in stone. One of his engineers timidly points out that there's no fresh water here. Alexander replies, "Dig canals." Another warns about the shifting sand. Alexander says, "Build higher." Someone else asks what happens if the locals revolt. Alexander just smiles and gestures to the army behind him. It's bold. It's reckless. It's very him. Back then, most rulers built cities where cities already made sense, along rivers, next to established trade routes, or at holy sites. Alexander, on the other hand, looked at a swampy beachfront and saw destiny. Maybe he wanted to be worshipped. Maybe he just wanted a break from all the marching. Maybe, as some fringe theories suggest, he was just really into coastal property. The locals watch as Alexander starts sketching plans with a sword in the sand. He's not drawing random lines. He's laying out boulevards, neighborhoods, and temple districts. He even picks a spot for a future lighthouse on an island that barely fits a goat, but sure, why not? He names it Alexandria. Not exactly subtle. But hey, when you've already named dozens of other cities after yourself, one in almost every region you've conquered, what's one more? Some say this Alexandria was always meant to be special. Unlike the others, which were mostly military outposts or bragging rights, this one was designed for legacy. Stone by stone, it would carry his name into eternity. That's the thing about Alexander. For all the blood and fire, he wasn't just a destroyer. He wanted to build, to leave behind something that could speak for him long after the shouting was over. You take one last look at the empty shore. It's hard to picture anything majestic here. Just waves, wind, and a sky that never seems to end. But Alexander sees more. He sees libraries full of scrolls not yet written, ships docked at ports that haven't been dredged. People, Greek, Egyptian, Persian, all crammed together, buying bread and arguing over philosophy. And you know what? He's not entirely wrong. In a few years, that sketch in the sand will become a shimmering jewel of the ancient world. A place where scholars gather, scrolls pile up, and torchlight dances off white marble at night. But tonight, it's just you, the stars, and a young conqueror mumbling about zoning regulations. You step backward from the shoreline and backward in time, about 15 years earlier. The sand disappears, replaced by polished stone floors and columns carved with scenes of heroes slaying beasts. The air smells like olive oil, ink, and ambition. Welcome to the royal palace in Pella, the Macedonian capital, where a boy is reading a book that's older than most of his ancestors. This is Alexander, age 10, curled up with the Iliad under the flickering light of a bronze lamp. He's not reading like a kid trying to pass the time. He's reading like someone looking for instructions. Because for Alexander, Achilles isn't just a myth, he's a manual. You shift in the shadows of the library and spot another figure, Aristotle. Yes, the Aristotle, one of the smartest people in recorded history, now tasked with tutoring a boy who throws javelins indoors. It's a thankless job, like explaining math to a caffeinated cat, but Aristotle tries. He teaches Alexander everything: ethics, science, medicine, astronomy, poetry, philosophy. Also, botany, because apparently a conqueror should know his herbs. Still, one subject sticks more than the rest: how heroes build legacies. Not through killing, but through founding. Cities, libraries, institutions, a lasting echo of their name. You wonder if little Alexander understood that lesson, or if he just wanted to outdo Achilles. Historians still argue whether Aristotle actually gave him the idea of founding cities, or if Alexander was already dreaming about urban planning before he could spell agora. But what's certain is that he absorbed the idea that greatness wasn't just battlefield glory. It was architecture, philosophy, and civic immortality. Of course, even as a boy, Alexander was restless. He preferred climbing cliffs to parsing verbs. He'd ask questions like, if Heracles traveled that far, why can't I? And why don't we just conquer Asia? One tutor supposedly tried to discipline him with a switch. That man resigned shortly afterward. Smart move. As a teenager, Alexander got his first taste of real war. At age 16, while his dad Philip was off conquering things, Alexander founded his first city. Not a major one, more of a fortified base, but it was called Alexandropolis. Naturally. The point is, even then, he had a thing for laying foundations. Literal ones. Fast forward a few years, and Philip is dead, assassinated under very suspicious circumstances involving family drama, palace intrigue, and probably at least one poisoned pastry. Alexander steps up, 20 years old, and immediately starts conquering like he's late for something. But even as he blazes across Asia Minor, Persia, and Egypt, he doesn't just burn and loot. He builds. After a victory, he often pauses to found a new city, usually on the site of a former enemy's stronghold, and always named Alexandria. It's like leaving business cards behind, except they're made of stone and still exist 2,000 years later. Some cities are purely military, garrisoned with Greek veterans. Others are for trade, sitting on key rivers or roads. A few are just strange. One Alexandria was founded in modern-day Afghanistan, another in Pakistan. One was built in the desert with no clear reason, unless Alexander really loved sunsets. You can almost hear his generals groaning. Great, another Alexandria. Shall we build a Starbucks too? But the man had a vision. These cities would spread Greek language, art, and culture, what historians now call Hellenization. He wasn't just carving out an empire, he was remaking the world in his image. And yet there's something oddly tender about it. Amid the chaos of conquest, city building became Alexander's way of grounding himself. When the noise of war stopped, he turned to geometry, to roads and walls, to symmetry and sculpture. The sword paused and the compass came out. Here's a quirky tidbit. According to one story, Alexander slept with a dagger under his pillow and a copy of the Iliad. He kept it in a special box taken from the treasure of King Darius. Who needs a bedtime teddy bear when you have 15,000 lines of epic poetry? As you follow him from battlefield to blueprint, you start to see the pattern. Alexander isn't just founding cities out of strategy. He's performing mythology. He wants to be remembered like Heracles and Perseus, not just as a killer, but as a creator. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. Some advisors complain that the locals don't want Greek cities. Others argue that the empire's resources are stretched too thin. One man even tells Alexander he should slow down and enjoy what he already controls. That man disappears shortly after. But Alexander doesn't slow down. He keeps sketching street plans, commissioning temples, and assigning names. And as strange as it sounds, each new city feels like a quiet act of hope. Maybe he's imagining a time beyond war. Maybe, in some far-off future, people will forget the blood and only see the marble. You picture him in a rare, quiet moment, staring at a half-built plaza, imagining children playing where soldiers once marched. The idea of peace must have flickered across his mind, even if only briefly, because there's always another battle, another river to cross, another mountain to climb. But still, always time to plant the seeds of a city. The sandals crunch on sun-baked earth. You're back in Egypt now. Alexander is older, warier, but still burning with that wild-eyed certainty that the gods might be listening. He's just walked into the land of pyramids and papyrus, and unlike other places he's conquered, Egypt opens its arms like a grateful heir welcoming a long-lost brother. See, the Persians had ruled here for a while, and not very gracefully. They taxed too much, understood too little, and left the locals feeling like tenants in their own temples. So when Alexander strolled in, promising not to loot their sacred things or insult their crocodile gods, the Egyptians practically threw him a welcome parade. Now, Alexander isn't dumb. He knows PR when he sees it. So what does he do? He leans into it. Hard. You watch as he dresses like a pharaoh, golden headdress, flowing robes, enough eyeliner to make an Instagram model jealous. He parades through Memphis, makes sacrifices to Egyptian gods, and tells the priests exactly what they want to hear. Yes, I'm the chosen one. Also, where's the good incense? Historians still argue whether he genuinely believed in the gods of Egypt or was just being politically savvy. Maybe it was both. Alexander had a gift for blending performance with conviction, like a man who could cry real tears on cue because he meant them. But nothing beats the road trip to Siwa. You're there, riding alongside him across the western desert, where the wind cuts like a whisper and the sun tries to cook your thoughts. Alexander insists on visiting the Oracle of Ammon, an isolated temple hidden in a sun-bleached oasis. It's a grueling journey, filled with mirages and silence. One legend says they were saved by ravens who led the way. Another says serpents whispered directions in the wind. Or maybe someone just had a very good map. When he finally arrives, the priests greet him with solemn nods and mysterious chants. They lead him into the sacred chamber alone. No one hears what the oracle says, but when Alexander walks out, his face is pale and he won't repeat the message. All he says is, "It confirmed what I knew." What did he know exactly? Well, the whispers start, that he's the son of Zeus Ammon, a literal demigod. That he was destined not just to rule, but to transcend. The rumor spreads like incense smoke, sweet and invasive. And while some of his companions roll their eyes, most just nod quietly. After all, the man had conquered half the known world before turning 30. You wander through the temple complex, stepping between painted pillars and crumbling murals of falcon-headed deities. There's a strange peace here. You get the sense that Alexander came not just for answers, but for permission. Maybe from the gods, maybe from himself. Back in Memphis, he begins laying plans for his city by the sea. Now it's not just about ports and markets, it's about making a statement, a place that fuses Egypt and Greece, gods and reason, myth and geometry. A city that screams, "Here is where the old world ends and my world begins." You sip from a water skin and watch the scribes get to work. They argue over measurements, star positions, wind directions. The priests want temples aligned with solstices. The engineers want solid foundations. Alexander wants everything, and he wants it now. Here's a strange little fact. When the Egyptian priests saw his plan, some of them tried to divine the future of the city using bird entrails. They said the omens were unclear. Alexander shrugged and said, "We'll make them clearer." You smile. That's him in a nutshell. Still, even with all the mystical theatrics and godlike status, Alexander knew that optics mattered. He used Egypt's love for symbols and ritual not just to secure loyalty, but to give his city a kind of divine license, a capital stamped with the approval of both heaven and earth. By aligning himself with pharaohs, he inherited their legitimacy. By claiming descent from a god, he gave his rule a timeless, mythic glow. You can almost hear the spin doctors back in Macedonia shouting, "That's not how divine ancestry works." But by the time the news got there, it was how it worked. And so, with public opinion firmly enchanted and the priesthood purring like sun-warmed cats, Alexander returned to the coast, to that ghostly strip of sand between sea and swamp, where his dream city would begin. You walk behind him as he surveys the emptiness. His gaze isn't searching, it's building. He gestures toward the future harbor, already imagining merchant ships from every corner of the Mediterranean. He points to a hillock, murmurs about statues, gardens, amphitheaters. You try to picture it all. Marble facades gleaming like teeth in the sun, the air buzzing with languages, the streets straight and clean like lines drawn by a god with OCD. The wind kicks up a bit, rustling your cloak and sending tiny spirals of sand into the air. Alexander closes his eyes and lets it sting his face. Maybe he's feeling the breath of the gods, or maybe he's just checking the direction for future sea breezes. You look back once more at Siwa, now just a memory of palm trees and divine whispers. That moment with the Oracle will stay with him forever. Whether it was real or staged, sincere or sly, it changed him. He came into Egypt a brilliant general. He left it convinced he was something more. And when you think about it, maybe that's why he wanted to build here. Not just to connect trade routes, not just to impress his Greek peers, not even to please the Egyptian priesthood. No, maybe he chose this strange blank space on the map because it was empty enough to fit his full-sized myth. The wind is brisk and salt-laced as you return to that stretch of shoreline. The sea murmurs to itself, gulls squawk with existential confusion, and Alexander, the man who now claims divine ancestry, stands ankle-deep in sand, wielding barley flour like he's about to bake the world's biggest flatbread. You blink. Did he just draw a city plan with cereal? Yes, he did. You're watching history's most ambitious construction project begin with what amounts to a gluten-based doodle. Alexander walks in slow, deliberate circles, pouring handfuls of flour in long, straight lines on the sand. This is no casual sketch. It's the sacred outline of the city to be, Alexandria. His engineers follow behind him, squinting skeptically. Some mutter, others whisper. One very tired man gestures at the barley and asks, "Should we maybe use something more permanent?" Alexander doesn't answer. He's in a zone. Historians still argue whether this whole barley ritual was symbolic or spur-of-the-moment theater. According to one version, Alexander didn't even intend to use flour. His soldiers had no chalk or rope on hand, so he grabbed what they had, rations, and got poetic with it. Another version says this was a traditional Hellenic rite, a way to consecrate land with a food offering. Honestly, it might have been both. He liked a little drama with his destiny. Then it gets weirder. Just as he finishes the last perimeter loop, a flock of birds, dozens of them, swoop down and begin devouring the barley lines. The engineers panic. Bad omen? Terrible sign? Should we scrap the whole project and maybe just head back to Memphis? Alexander watches for a moment, face unreadable. Then he smiles and says, "No, it's a good omen. The city will feed the world." You can't help but admire the confidence. Some guys panic when pigeons ruin their sidewalk chalk. Alexander turns it into a prophecy. He orders construction to begin immediately. The army sets up tents. Surveyors start measuring real plots. And out of that sand and flour sketch, a blueprint begins to take shape. The plan is revolutionary for the time. A massive grid layout, clean and rational, with two main streets intersecting like the bones of a compass, one running east to west, the other north to south. The city would have harbors on both sides, one for local Egyptian trade, the other wide open to the Mediterranean. In between, forums, temples, theaters, and a royal quarter for Alexander himself. You know, in case he ever came back to live here. Spoiler, he didn't. Still, he assigned the job of actual city planning to a trusted architect named Dinocrates of Rhodes, a man with a flair for scale and no fear of overly ambitious dreams. Fun fact? Dinocrates once proposed carving a colossal statue of Alexander into a mountain, like a bronze Mount Rushmore with only one very confident face. Here, though, his task was practical and poetic. Turn sand into structure. Build a city that looked like a philosopher's ideal, ran like a general's campaign, and shined like something touched by gods. You follow the planners as they pace the grid lines, placing flags in the dirt, mumbling about sewage flow and sun angles. There's excitement, sure, but also hesitation. This area is prone to flooding. The wind is intense. The marshland is unstable. One builder mutters that half the city might just sink. Alexander shrugs. Then build it higher. The man had the architectural patience of a caffeinated falcon. But he didn't need to know how every pipe would work. That was Dinocrates' job. Alexander's job was vision. He wanted a city that could rival Athens in learning, Babylon in wealth, and Thebes in beauty. And he wanted it yesterday. Every detail he insisted on had purpose. The main boulevard would be wide enough for 5 chariots side by side. The central library would not just store Egyptian scrolls, but every scroll, from every civilization, in every language. Even the languages no one could read yet. And then there was Pharos, that little island, just off the coast, barely more than a rock with attitude. Alexander pointed to it and said, "We'll build a lighthouse there, one so tall it will guide ships from beyond the horizon." The engineers exchanged glances that clearly said, "Has he been drinking Nile water again?" But no one argued. Because when Alexander made a decision, reality tended to rearrange itself accordingly. You sit on the sand watching the sun sink behind the half-built tent city. Sailors unload crates from distant ships. Camels grumble near fresh-dug wells. And Alexander walks the perimeter again, this time not with flour, but with his shadow trailing behind him like a cape. A quirky side note: ancient sources claim Alexander personally measured the stars above the site to align key roads and buildings. Some even say he chose the date of foundation to match specific constellations. Was he an early astrologer, a control freak, or just someone who liked the stars to look right in his personal skyline? Again, historians still debate, but you start to get the feeling that this city wasn't just a project, it was a mirror. Everything Alexander saw in himself, ambition, elegance, immortality, he tried to pour into the stones of Alexandria. And the strangest part? It's working. Even as tents give way to marble, even as engineers solve the water problems and haul stone across the sand, something in the air shifts. You can almost feel the city beginning to breathe. The gulls return, circling higher now, as if trying to glimpse the future. Alexander watches them and smiles. Not because the birds are eating flour this time, but because he knows. He's built more than a city. He's sketched himself into history. You wake up to the sound of shouting and hammers. Alexandria is rising, not just as an idea now, but as an actual, noisy, dusty, bickering construction site. Think less serene temple, more 3 guys arguing over where the toilets go. Welcome to the next phase of the dream, turning sand into stone. You wander through the bustling site. Workers from every corner of the empire, Greeks, Egyptians, Phoenicians, even some Persians who definitely aren't thrilled to be here, haul blocks, mix lime, and attempt to follow a blueprint more complicated than Alexander's family tree. Dinocrates, the architect, storms around in a sweat-soaked tunic, waving rolled-up plans and muttering things like, "That column was supposed to be 3 cubits north, not on fire." There's yelling in at least 6 languages. A shipment of marble has gone missing. Someone's goat is chewing on a surveyor's map. And the Nile's flooding again, just to keep things interesting. But amid the chaos, the bones of the city begin to take form. You walk the main avenue, still dusty, but already wide and impossibly straight. It runs over 4 kilometers, cutting through the city like a spear. Shops are being framed out with timber. Statues are arriving by barge, still wrapped in straw. Public baths are halfway finished, and someone is already debating the proper temperature for intellectual discussion in the steam room. And above it all, at the edge of the harbor, the foundations for the lighthouse of Pharos begin. Now, this wasn't just a building. This was a statement. It would rise over 100 meters tall, shining fire and polished bronze across the Mediterranean. At night, its beacon could be seen for miles. During the day, it would reflect the sun like a signal to the gods. It would take years to finish, long after Alexander was gone, but it began here, with his finger jabbing at an island and saying, "that." Historians still argue whether Alexander genuinely understood the engineering challenges of this lighthouse, or whether he just assumed people would figure it out. The man wasn't exactly known for patience. One story claims he approved plans after seeing only a sketch, and then demanded it be twice as tall. Classic. But not everything was grand and glorious. The city faced constant, very real problems. The terrain was unstable, marshy in some parts, bone-dry in others. Freshwater had to be dragged in from miles away using primitive channels. The 2 harbors intended for trade and navy kept silting up because the engineers miscalculated tidal patterns. Even worse, the locals didn't always cooperate. Some Egyptians saw the city as an alien project. Others simply didn't appreciate being relocated to make room for gymnasiums and theaters. The clash of cultures was real. Alexandria was supposed to be a fusion of East and West, but sometimes it felt like a construction site glued together with arguments and olive oil. Still, there was something compelling in the ambition. You pass a group of sculptors chiseling out lions for the main gate. They pause to wipe their brows, then joke that if the lions don't impress the gods, at least they'll scare off burglars. Nearby, a carpenter builds the frame for what will become part of the Mauseon, the great center of learning Alexander dreamed of. "We're making space for scrolls," he says. "All the scrolls." You blink. "How many scrolls are there in the world?" "All of them," he repeats, dead serious. A quirky fact: later on, this very city would issue a law requiring every ship that docked in its harbor to surrender any books on board. These were copied by scribes, and the originals kept in the library. Who needs pirates when you've got librarians? And then there's the issue of who gets to live here. Alexander wanted Alexandria to be a melting pot, a mix of Egyptians, Greeks, Persians, Phoenicians, Jews, and even some Indians. He envisioned temples to different gods, side by side. He wanted debates in the market, multiple languages on every sign, and dinner tables where fish sauce and feta collided in glorious confusion. But harmony doesn't come easy. You overhear arguments in the forum about tax rights, citizenship, where shrines should be placed. Some Greeks want to push Egyptians to the edge of town. Some locals want their own laws. One merchant has built a shrine to both Zeus and Osiris, and nobody can agree if that's sacrilege or genius. Dinocrates storms by again, muttering about sewer lines and how no one respects proportional columns anymore. He stops, scowls at a temple wall that's 3 degrees off, then sighs. "This would be easier if the Nile had Wi-Fi," he says. You're not sure what Wi-Fi is, but he's clearly had enough. Alexander himself checks in occasionally. He doesn't live here. He's got Persia and India to conquer, remember? But he sends letters, very specific letters. Add 2 more theaters, include stables for 800 horses, make the agora face east. You get the sense he's designing a city for his return, a city that will greet him like a homecoming king. Spoiler, he never returns. Still, the people keep building. Because that's what humans do. We take dust and dreams and stack them into something that might survive a storm. By the end of the year, Alexandria is no longer a sketch in the sand. It has roads, gates, a seawall, shrines and scaffolding. People argue in its markets. Lovers meet in its unfinished courtyards. And though it's still raw and cracked and half done, it lives. You stand on the lighthouse foundation, watching torches flicker across the half-born city. And you realize this place wasn't just built in the middle of nowhere. It was built to erase nowhere, to turn a blank spot into a center of the world. And somehow, it's working. You wander out of the construction dust and into a more ancient kind of silence, the kind filled with maps, trade routes, and the soft groaning of overworked pack animals. Because here's the truth Alexander saw, and most people miss. This middle of nowhere was actually somewhere very important. Let's take a step back. You're floating over the eastern Mediterranean, staring down at the edge of Africa and the mouth of the Nile. Alexandria doesn't look like much yet, just a grid scratched into the land like a toddler's idea of SimCity. But pull the view wider, and suddenly it makes sense. To the north, you've got Greece and the wider Mediterranean world. Olive oil, wine, marble statues, and a lot of opinions. To the south, the Nile snakes through Egypt like a patient dragon, bringing grain, mountains of it. To the east, caravans crawl across deserts with incense, silk, spices, and very tired camels. And to the west, North Africa unspools into the Sahara, full of salt mines, oases, and civilizations no one in Athens has even heard of. Put simply, this stretch of swampy, unclaimed Egyptian coast, it's the hinge between continents. Alexander understood that, or at least he felt it. Maybe it wasn't a trade center yet, but he could smell it in the air, the crossroads potential. The city he was building wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. You walk the rising docks of Alexandria, half built and creaking, but already busy. Merchants arrive daily, some by sea, some by sand. They unload crates of papyrus, sacks of lentils, rolls of Persian fabric. One man carries nothing but a jar of honey and a huge lizard. No one asks questions. Historians still argue whether Alexander had detailed intelligence reports on the local trade economy or if he just followed his gut. But he wasn't wrong. The Nile Delta was fertile, ridiculously so. Egypt exported enough grain to feed massive armies. Combine that with a good harbor and roads, and suddenly Alexandria is not a vanity project. It's an economic nuke. And the canals. Oh, the canals. Dinocrates and his engineers weren't just building for beauty. They were channeling the Nile, digging man-made arteries to bring fresh water to the city and turn marsh into miracle. People forget just how advanced Egyptian irrigation was. Even the Greeks were like, wait, they've been doing this how long? But there was more going on than just water and wheat. You sit in the shade of an early marketplace and overhear voices. Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, Phoenician. The accents clash like cymbals. A trader from Tyre is explaining purple dye to a stunned farmer. A scribe is haggling over a scroll written in Demotic script. A Jewish merchant is selling salted fish next to a guy who's definitely pretending his lentils cure headaches. This isn't just commerce, it's collision. Of languages, religions, traditions. Alexandria wasn't just at a crossroads, it was the crossroads. And like any true crossroads, it had the charm of opportunity and the chaos of a really bad group project. A quirky detail? Ancient reports say some Alexandrians started mixing languages into a kind of city-speak. Not quite Greek, not quite Egyptian, just a weird, spicy dialect that made outsiders raise an eyebrow. Linguistic fusion, centuries before Spanglish, was cool. You walk through a half-finished alley where kids kick a makeshift ball between scaffolding and vendors shout over one another in a dozen tongues. The city is messy, but it's awake, alive. And you start to get it. Why here? Why now? Why this spot that once looked so empty was actually bursting with unseen threads? Alexander had an instinct for geography. He could stand on a rock and feel the invisible roads that connected worlds. It wasn't magic. It was pattern recognition. The way water moves, the way camels wear trails into sand, the way people chase food or gold or peace. So even though it looked like nowhere, it wasn't. You pause at the edge of the construction zone and look toward the horizon, where the sea glimmers. That little island out there, Pharos, once held nothing but seagulls and bad smells. Now they're laying the base for a lighthouse so massive, it'll become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It'll shine like a beacon, not just to ships, but to the entire known world. A message. We are here. But that's the thing about cities. They don't just mark geography, they reshape it. Alexandria didn't start where trade happened. It made trade want to happen there. Like one of those diners that opens in the middle of the highway and suddenly everyone detours for pie. Even the scholars started arriving early. You overhear one, beard-wild, pockets full of scrolls, muttering about Aristotle and planetary motion. He's arguing with another man over the correct translation of a Babylonian star chart. Neither of them is technically employed yet, but the dream of a great library is already pulling minds like gravity. And underneath all this, under the crates and the camels, the scaffolding and the city-speak, there's something else. Alexander's ego, humming quietly like a power generator. Because make no mistake, for all the strategy and science, he wanted this city to shout his name across the centuries. Not in blood, in brick, in boulevards, in scrolls and statues, and every whispered "did you know" spoken over its walls. So when someone asks, why here? You can tell them, because here was exactly far enough from everything to become the center of everything. The streets are livelier now, less dust, more marble. The sounds of hammers have softened into footsteps, chisel taps, and heated philosophical debates. Alexandria is no longer a dream sketched in barley flour. It's real, it's bustling, and it's standing, but its builder is long gone. Alexander never came back. You walk through the finished agora, the grand marketplace, where sunlight spills through open colonnades and merchants shout over piles of dyed linen, amphorae of olive oil, dried figs, and the occasional suspicious-looking fish. Shoppers wander past, arguing about tax rates and what exactly qualifies as fresh. Overhead, flags flap in the sea breeze, some bearing Greek owls, others Egyptian lotus flowers, and one with Alexander's face, just to remind everyone who's boss, even in absence. Because by now he's far away, deep into the east, chasing dreams along the Indus River. His armies are exhausted, his horses are thinner, his men are starting to grumble about going home. But Alexander? He's still hungry. For legacy, For more land. For something no one can quite define. Historians still debate whether he ever truly intended to return to Alexandria, or if the city was always meant as a monument rather than a home. Some believe he hoped to rule the empire from there one day. Others think he knew, deep down, that he was building something he'd never get to enjoy. Because death, like bad weather and overly long scrolls, shows up whether you planned for it or not. You sit in the grand courtyard of the Mauseon, the great academic center taking shape next to the library. Scrolls line the walls in neat rows, carefully copied by trained scribes who probably have ink stains in places you don't want to imagine. Scholars debate geometry, astronomy, medicine, and even poetry, all under one roof. They've started calling it the brain of the world. And outside, Alexandria pulses with life. Ships dock daily. Caravans unload. Ideas crash into each other in the streets and blend into something new. This city is working exactly as Alexander imagined. But then the news comes. Alexander is dead. Babylon. Fever, or poison, or exhaustion, or too many battles, too many gods, too much ambition in one body. Historians still argue, but the result is the same. 32 years old and gone. The world stops. In Alexandria, the citizens mourn. Priests hold quiet vigils. Soldiers lower banners. And then comes the next question. What happens now? His generals scramble. The empire he built was held together by sheer force of his will, and without him, it begins to unravel like a poorly tied sandal. Wars of succession break out. Old alliances crack. Regions rebel. The dream of a united empire frays into fragments. And Alexandria? She stays standing. You walk the seawall, now paved and polished as gossip flies like seabirds. One general wants to move the capital elsewhere. Another wants to claim Alexander's corpse. A rumor spreads that he'll be buried in Macedonia. Another says Egypt. The people whisper, he loved this place. He would have come back. Eventually, the body comes here. In a crystal casket, if you believe the sources. Displayed in a golden tomb, visited by Roman emperors centuries later. Julius Caesar is said to have wept at the sight. Caligula may have stolen his breastplate. Classic Caligula. And the city he built, the one born from flower and wind, it outlives him. It grows into a marvel. Under the rule of the Ptolemies, descendants of one of Alexander's top generals, it becomes the beating heart of knowledge in the ancient world. The library holds hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Scientists dissect everything from geometry to giraffes. Poets invent new forms. Philosophers argue until someone throws a melon. A quirky tale. One Ptolemaic king was so obsessed with filling the library that he supposedly borrowed entire collections from Athens and never returned them. He paid the late fee in gold. Librarian approved, if not exactly ethical. You pass the construction of a new temple to Serapis, a god invented by the city's rulers to blend Greek and Egyptian beliefs. That's Alexandria for you. Part spiritual diplomacy, part PR campaign, part accidental genius. And everywhere you look, the name Alexander is etched into stone. Not as a conqueror, not as a destroyer, but as a founder. That's the strange, beautiful twist. For all his battles, bloodshed, and ambition, it's this, the city, that becomes his softest legacy. Alexandria becomes what he could not, permanent. The city will face earthquakes, riots, fires. Even Julius Caesar will accidentally burn part of the library during a naval battle. But the bones of the place, they hold. For centuries, it remains a gateway, a memory, a miracle carved into a former swamp. And it all started because one man stood on a windy beach and said, "Here." You look out at the horizon again. The lighthouse on Pharos is nearly finished now. Towering, proud, catching the sun and throwing it back to sea. Ships follow its fire to safety. Travelers steer toward it like moths. It doesn't just guide them to Alexandria, it pulls them into history. And deep beneath it all, the soul of the city whispers something simple. He never came back, but his dream never left. The wind off the harbor is softer now, as if even the sea is learning to speak in hushed tones. Alexandria stands tall, its streets paved, its towers proud, its scrolls multiplying like rabbits in the archives. You walk the boulevards and feel it. The pulse of a city fully awake, still growing, still remembering the hand that shaped it from silence. It is no longer Alexander's city. It's everyone's. But it still carries his fingerprints, in the angles of its roads, in the way the sun hits its columns at noon, in the stories people whisper about how it all began. It's a place where myth was poured into stone, and somehow that myth stayed standing, even when the man didn't. The library is the center now. More than just a building, it's a living organism. Scribes in white robes flutter like birds through endless shelves. Some are translating Homer into Egyptian. Others are copying Indian astronomy into Greek. A young student invents a word for lens. Another proposes that the Earth might orbit the sun, and is promptly told to keep that to himself, for now. You sit by a fountain near the Mauseon. A group of philosophers is debating whether water has memory, or whether it's just very good at hiding things. One old man mutters that it doesn't matter because the only thing that remembers everything is Alexandria. And he's not wrong. This city becomes a magnet for genius. Archimedes visits. Euclid teaches. Eratosthenes calculates the circumference of the earth with a stick and a well. Cleopatra is born here. Julius Caesar arrives, drawn more by curiosity than conquest. Augustus strolls through its gardens. They all come. They all leave. The city remains. Historians still debate whether this was Alexander's plan or just a happy accident. Did he truly see all this when he poured barley flour into the sand? Or did he just like the breeze in the harbor and hope for the best? No one knows. But what's clear is that Alexandria succeeded where empires failed. Alexander's empire, that sprawling monster stretching from Greece to India, lasted only a generation before splintering into jealous kingdoms. But Alexandria? Alexandria lived, for centuries. It became the intellectual capital of the world, longer than any general could hold a sword. And it did something else too. Something most cities don't. It remembered how it was made. You walk past a statue now, no longer of Alexander, but of Isis Pharia, a goddess of the sea. The fusion of Greek and Egyptian still sings in the stones, in the street names, in the scent of cumin and pine. Alexandria became a recipe, not a monument. A place built on mixing, not mirroring. And yet, his name is still everywhere, carved in friezes, written in ink, whispered in marketplaces. Alexander, the man who never returned, became its eternal guest. A quirky footnote, centuries later, when the great library was long gone, burned, lost, or perhaps just slowly neglected, there were rumors that a single book survived. A scroll detailing how the city had been founded, with diagrams, with a grain count for the barley flour. Scholars fought over its authenticity. No one ever found it. But here you are, walking its shape, standing in its story. You pass the old harbor and stare at the distant horizon. The lighthouse still flickers, the markets still buzz. A child skips by holding a tablet, clay, not iPad, and recites a line of poetry. A boat docks, a bell rings. Somewhere, someone quotes Aristotle. Somewhere else, someone asks, "Who was Alexander again?" That's the funny thing about legacy. It doesn't ask for attention. It just becomes air. You breathe it. You build on it. You forget it's even there. And in that forgetting, it wins. Because the greatest monuments aren't made of stone. They're made of rhythm. They're made of places where people meet, argue, love, trade, think, cook, pray, and dream. And this city, this Alexandria, was designed to do exactly that. Even now, 2,000 years later, its name means something. So if anyone asks why Alexander built a city in the middle of nowhere, you'll know the answer. He didn't. He built it in the middle of forever. So now, let's slow things down. You're sitting on the edge of the ancient harbor, the air cooler now, gentler. The waves brush against the shore with a sleepy rhythm, like breath. Alexandria stretches behind you, quiet, full of ghosts who aren't trying to haunt you, just to be remembered. The torchlight from the great lighthouse casts a faint shimmer across the sea. In that flicker, you can almost imagine Alexander's silhouette, not as a warrior, but as a boy again, curled up with his scrolls, tracing the path of heroes across his fingers. He wanted so badly to leave something behind that couldn't be burned, broken, or forgotten. And somehow he did, his city. Let your shoulders fall a little. The journey's done. The winds that once carried warships now carry nothing more than stories and the smell of old books. The crowds have quieted. The stones are warm beneath you. Even the statues seem to be listening. Let go of the maps and dates. Just hold on to the image. A city carved out of nowhere, fed by the Nile, lit by the sun, and guided by stars. A city that remembers everything. So close your eyes now. Let the sounds fade, the sea, the market, the whispers of scholars. Let it all dissolve into hush. You're safe here. The past is watching over you. And maybe, just maybe, Alexandria still dreams of its maker.